Welcome back to my Fire Emblem 25th Anniversary retrospective. Last time I covered my thoughts on pretty much the first half of the series that I played. So this time, let's get right into it. Now, the next game I played, I'm pretty sure it was Mystery of the Emblem, and I played both Books 1 and Books 2 pretty much back to back. Now, I mostly knew this game from a walkthrough of it that I read. I was interested in the Japanese Fire Emblem games, and I remember finding a particular website. I forget what it actually was called, but it was a website that hosted walkthroughs for all of the Japan-only games, and I actually read through a lot of them before I even played those games, just to know what I was getting into. Reading the walkthrough for this one was kind of interesting, knowing that the first part was a remake of the very first Fire Emblem game, and the second was an entirely new story. Funnily enough, the person doing the walkthrough was a little eccentric in the fact that they absolutely despise the localized name Marth, and preferred to call him Mars, which was kind of amusing. But as for my overall thoughts on the game, now, I forget whether or not I even had a fan translation for this one. I don't know whether the Mystery of the Emblem translation was even complete at the time. I think I had a translation that just translated characters' names and weapon names, but other than that, I'm pretty sure that all the story was just blank text boxes, so I had to look up the scripts online. I should have mentioned that, in fact, I had to do that for Fire Emblem 4 as well, because my translation patch for that game was kind of bad as well. Fortunately, at least Book 1 of Mystery of the Emblem isn't very heavy on story, so I could play that just fine without understanding anything. Overall, I found this to be a pretty decent game. Apparently in Japan, this is considered the magnum opus of the entire series. And I guess in ways I can kind of see why. It is one of the longest Fire Emblem games. Combining the two books, you get 40 chapters, which is actually very, very long. Only Radiant Dawn comes close to that with a number of main chapters, and Blazing Sword and Awakening get close to that. Well, not Awakening surpasses it, but Blazing Sword gets close with a number of side quest chapters. But again, in terms of main story chapters, this was a pretty long game. I liked a lot of the characters there, both gameplay and story-wise. Characters like Sheeta, Ogma, the Pegasus Sisters, Merrick, Linda. There were a lot of really good characters stat-wise. Sadly, Marth wasn't all that great due to his lack of an ability to promote, but that was kind of the thing with early Lords. Overall, I do kind of remember liking Book 2 more than Book 1, mostly because of the fact that, if there's one bad thing I'll say about this game, it's that the fact that 90% of all the chapters in Book 1 have the exact same map theme. Oh, I was really glad when Shadow Dragon changed that, because I was so sick of hearing da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. Once we got to the second last chapter, I was just thinking, if I hear this map theme one more time, I am going to destroy everything. But, yeah. Overall, though, I did really like this game. I don't have as much of a connection to it as I do some of the other games, but it is one of my favourites of the Japan-only titles, probably after Fire Emblem 4. I think I played Fire Emblem 5 next. Now, this game is also kind of low on my list to me, and I know a lot of people really like this game, but to me, it's probably my third least favourite in the series, mostly because I love the epic grand scale of Fire Emblem 4, and this game basically takes that universe and makes a smaller scale Fire Emblem game out of it, which I wasn't exactly a real fan of. A lot of the characters didn't come off as that memorable to me either. There were a few standouts, like Marita definitely, Aval in terms of her backstory, Orsin because of his ridiculously good personal weapon, Carrion for being an S character done right, Sarah for being an S character done really right, and I did like a few of them, but a lot of the other characters just didn't stand out to me very much. Leif, Leif, I kind of prefer to pronounce it that way. I always have a mental debate with myself over whether it's him or Roy who's the worst Lord in the series. Now, Roy is at least good when he promotes. The problem with Leif is that even after he promotes, he still kind of sucks. But at least he has movement stars and leadership stars. And I think that gives him the slight edge over Roy, because even if he's not contributing to the battle, at least he's contributing in the leadership stars department. So he's not entirely useless. That, and he's amazing in Fire Emblem 4, so I gotta give him credit for that. As far as mechanics go, though, I really did like the capturing system. I thought that was really interesting and added a whole new depth to the gameplay. Movement stars was alright, but it was another luck-based mechanic that was very, very unreliable. At least the characters with high movement stars were generally people who you wouldn't consider using normally, so that was kind of good. But, and I do admit, okay, Fog of War debuted here. Well, I guess that's not really a good thing, but I mean, I admit that Fog of War is a good mechanic if it affects the enemy just as well as it does you. Otherwise, it's totally unfair, and most Fire Emblem games go with the unfair option. Also, Fire Emblem 5 introduced the concept of branching paths and, like, route splits. It only lasted for a couple of chapters, and I admit that I've never actually played the A path of, Fire Emblem 5. The one where you actually have to fight Ishtar, basically the hard route. And honestly, I don't want to do that because I'm very, very, very scared of that route. Especially the fact that there's a recruitable character on that path who you have to use a sleep staff in order to capture, in order to recruit her. Oh, that was annoying. Admittedly, though, I did end up recruiting Xavier. That almost killed me. And I still think that Xavier is by far the hardest character to recruit in the history of the series. The fact that I even did that, I consider an accomplishment in and of itself. But the main reason why I don't like this game as much as a lot of others is, many people say that Fire Emblem 5, Thracia 776, is one of the hardest, if not the hardest games in the series. And I would agree, but it's hard for all the wrong reasons. Much of the difficulty in this game is flat out artificial difficulty, and just plain cheapness. I can equate it to battle facilities in Pokemon. They're hard, but for all the wrong reasons. And basically, Fire Emblem 5 stacks the odds in the favor of the AI in its mechanics so much that I feel it's very unfair. Firstly, the capturing system. Now, I agree that it's a good system in theory. In practice, though, the fact that healers get instantly captured the moment someone so much as touches them means that enemy Wyvern Riders are such a huge threat to your healers. If they even touch one of your healers, bang, all their staves are gone. Even if you get the healer back, you've lost their entire inventory. Nice job. Then you have status ailments. Oh boy. Status ailments last the entirety of a chapter unless cured, and curing staves are in a very short supply. This wouldn't be so bad if it weren't for the fact that some of the statuses are incredibly devastating. Putting you to sleep forcibly dismounts mounted units and lets them be captured by the enemy instantly in the same manner as healers. Poison wouldn't be so bad if it weren't for the fact that the standard dark magic spell automatically inflicts poison on anyone it hits. And here's where things get really unfair and cheap. You later recruit a Dark Mage of your own, Salem, the first ever recruitable Dark Mage in Fire Emblem history. And guess what? When he uses the exact same Dark Magic spell as the enemies, he doesn't poison them. Yep, the poison effect is exclusive to the AI. And that really makes me lose a lot of respect for this game. That is just not fair. That's just plain artificial difficulty. Another thing that makes this game so much artificially harder is the fact that healing staves can freaking miss in this game. It's the only Fire Emblem game ever where healing staves can miss, and it's not a good mechanic. It really, really isn't. Healing in a strategy game should not be down to luck. It's just, while I'm fine with attacks missing and critical hits because you can influence those somehow. With your character's skill stats, the weapon triangle, support bonuses, you can influence attacks hitting or missing. But there was no way to do that for healing staves, and the fact that healing is something that you desperately need, especially in a difficult game, the fact that they could miss was just downright, just way too punishing for my liking. And I could go on and on. There are a whole lot of other things in this game. The fact that there were NPCs, like green units, that actually attacked you... Oh, that really got me. That was just downright sadistic, and it almost felt like something out of an evil ROM hack rather than an official game. The fatigue system as well, forcing you to rotate your characters out a lot unless you had stamina drinks, and you also had the annoying thing of the fact that a character you need to recruit someone in the chapter happens to be too tired to participate, so you'll have to waste one of your precious S drinks. That got annoying very quickly as well. And while I admit that overall the chapters in Fire Emblem 5 were mostly not that bad, except for some of the few standout ones. Chapter 22 is just downright evil. Like that guy with like 20 leadership stars, a whole bunch of ballistas, Reinhardt. Apparently there was going to be another boss on that map as well in original plans. And there's that, and then there's Chapter 24X. Now, I will say, Fire Emblem 5 is to this day one of the only Fire Emblem games I have not actually completed yet. The reason? Chapter 24X made me rage quit. Those berserk staves with the fact that you can't cure them, the random warp tiles that send your characters into traps that you can't get them out of without warp staves, the berserkers that have instant criticals on counterattacks. That chapter was not fun, and the moment that I got to that chapter I decided, right, that's it, I'm not playing this game anymore. It's just too unfair. So yeah, call me a wimp if you want, but I prefer a game that's difficult for the right reasons rather than the wrong reasons. That's why I have no intention to ever play Lunatic Plus on Awakening. So yeah, I will admit that there are a lot of things in Fire Emblem 5 that are quite nice, and the story overall is fairly decent, but oh yeah, one other thing. I personally felt that the fact that characters were reduced to capping their stats at 20, that was kind of a step backwards to me, and I'm also glad that they plan to remove luck from the status screen entirely, but keep it in the game to add an element of uncertainty. I'm very glad they didn't do that, because that would have added an extra element of cheapness to the game. Next we come to Shadow Dragon. This was probably the next game in the series that I actually played. Now, Shadow Dragon is interesting for me because despite the fact this was the first ever Fire Emblem to be released in Australia first, I know, that shocked me too. It was almost like pigs flying. But I never actually played the English version. I bought this game, and I bought the actual physical DS copy of this game when I was in Japan on a school trip. In fact, I was in Akihabara at the time on my birthday, and that day is still one of my favourite birthdays ever. We explored a whole lot around Japan. Akihabara was seriously my paradise, although nowadays maybe not so much, because I was lucky enough to go there the year before. I think the year after I went, there was a murder there, but that birthday was still great, and yep, I got the Japanese copy of Shadow Dragon, and I played it on my English 3DS, because, not 3DS, original DS, because thankfully the original DS was not region locked. Seriously, region locking is a bad idea. It only encourages piracy, game companies. Stop doing it. So I played it in Japanese, used it as a bit of Japanese practice. And it was a good thing too, because Shadow Dragon is a fairly simple game. It's a pretty bare-bones remake of the original, with pretty minimal story, so I could actually understand most of the game. You don't need much Japanese skills to really be able to play it, so once I memorized the kanji for all the different weapons, and the characters' names, the menu icons, I could play the game pretty much fine in Japanese. And that was pretty much what got me started down the road of actually wanting to play more games in Japanese and wanting to be a translator someday, probably. As for what I thought about Shadow Dragon itself, while I was interested in it from the original screenshots that we saw of it, and I liked the character artwork in this game, but the problem I had, well, a problem a lot of people had, was this game is probably my second least favourite in the series, but to me, I kind of consider it to be objectively worse than Sword of Seals. I just dislike Sword of Seals more, personally. But yeah, this is my second least favourite game in the series. I equate this game to Pokemon Fire Red, in that it's a very bare-bones remake. It is basically just the original with a new coat of paint and nothing much else. Sure, it updates the mechanics to be more modern, but it didn't really update them enough, especially no support conversations. Now, I've said before that I still think Sword of Seals is worse for actually having support conversations that were terrible, but Shadow Dragon having no supports at all, and the vast majority of the characters being, well, I'd hesitate to even call them characters. They literally don't exist as characters. They're just pictures and stats. They're just nothing, really. And that leads into another one of the mechanics of this game, one of the reasons why it's one of my personal least favourites. And that is the side quests. Yeah, I'm one of those people who thinks that the fact that the game encourages you to kill off your own characters completely goes against the spirit of Fire Emblem. You're meant to care about your army. You're meant to care about your characters' lives. You're meant to try not to lose anyone. Yet Shadow Dragon's all like, you must kill this many characters to enter this chapter. You must kill this many characters to enter this chapter. Yeah, we're rewarding you for murdering your characters and sending them to their deaths. Ugh. The fact that most of the characters, I mean, you had characters in this game who never said anything until they died. That was pretty much to encourage you to kill them. And that's just one of the reasons why I don't like this game so much. It's just, I just really don't like that. Not only that, but overall the mechanics are kind of boring, and really the only thing that the game has that makes it stand out were those different levels of hard mode, but later games did hard modes better, so kind of quickly got outclassed there too. The other thing I dislike is the reclassing system. I think the fact that every character could freely change to any class totally defeated the point of every character being completely unique, and again, went against the essence of Fire Emblem. I mean, you know, who needs Cain and Abel to be the two Cavaliers when, oh hey, we can reclass them to Snipers or Draco Knights or things like that. That was annoying. I just really didn't like that system at all, and whenever I play the game, I never use the reclass system out of principle. But yeah, for these reasons, you're probably not going to see a Shadow Dragon playthrough on this channel. I'm just not a particularly big fan of the game. And so, when I heard that Mystery of the Emblem was getting remade in the same style, I was a little apprehensive at first. So, new Mystery of the Emblem, what do I think of this game? Well, like Shadow Dragon, I actually bought this in Japanese, but this time I imported the Japanese copy from Play Asia. Because I thought, you know what, I have Shadow Dragon in Japanese, I may as well complete the set in Japanese. So, yeah, I imported the Japanese version. Good thing I did, because eventually we found out this game was not getting localized. And it's a damn shame. This game is so much better than Shadow Dragon in almost every single way. In fact, this game might be in my top 3 of the series. Number 3 out of my personal favourites, I know Fire Emblem 4 is 1 and Radiant Dawn is 2, but number 3, it's always a toss-up between this game and Awakening, and I think this game might actually have the edge there. I played this game a bit in Japanese, and in fact, I chronicled my playthrough on the forums a bit, and I was actually translating a little bit of the story as I went. I did it on a whim at one point, and I eventually found it pretty fun. Now, back then, my translations were absolutely terrible, and I had a lot of severe problems. One of them was the fact that I constantly translated something that the avatar was referring to as their father, when in fact it was their grandfather. Yeah. But this game getting me into translation would actually be a very important point of my life, because that's what led me to decide that, you know what, I actually hope to become a game translator someday. Translating little bits of this game, now I actually wasn't involved in the translation patch for this game at all, the reason being I was involved in another translation patch. Translating for this game inspired me to go on to translate for another gem of the original DS that was never officially localized, Ace Attorney Investigations 2. In fact, these two games are very similar. Games to a not particularly well-received original that are sequels to them that improve on almost everything that was bad about the originals, and yet were both never localized because the original DS was pretty much dead in the West. I went on to translate bits of Ace Attorney Investigations 2, and eventually I went on to join a translation team that worked on a fan translation for that game, so yeah. I'm glad that so many people have got to play Ace Attorney Investigations 2. It is an amazing game, and I'm not going to talk about it more because that's for the wrong series. So, I'm also glad there was a translation patch for this game that led more people to be able to play this one, because if you have not played this game, I highly recommend it. This game is so much better than Shadow Dragon in almost every way, despite having pretty much the same graphical assets. In every way, it's so much better. Overall, it's longer than the Shadow Dragon. It has a much more developed plot than Shadow Dragon. Unlike Shadow Dragon, it actually expands on the original storyline. It has support conversations, of all things. I mean, they don't do anything in gameplay, but hey, it was a start. It adds an extra story arc to the original that fleshes out the motivations of Garneth actually a bit more. It adds in characters who were removed from the original mystery of the Emblem but were in Shadow Dragon, and gives them actual reasons for being there. Balance is a little bit better as well, with the Warp Staff not being as easily obtainable and being completely absent on Lunatic mode from what I remember. And speaking of Lunatic mode, this game was really the thing that introduced the mechanics that will go on to save the Fire Emblem series from certain death. And those were Casual mode and Lunatic mode, surprisingly enough. I think this game did such a good job of appealing to both new fans and hardcore fans. Lunatic mode was brutally difficult, but not unfairly so. Perfectly beatable, but requires very specific strategies, and it was just what a lot of the more hardcore members of the community really wanted. Casual mode, on the other hand, it lets players who would have been scared off by permanent death to enjoy the series and actually get into it. Many players who would never have played the Fire Emblem series before ended up experiencing it because of the addition of casual mode. And here's the thing though, it didn't impact the game for expert players because it's an entirely optional feature. You can completely ignore it if you want to. A lot of people think permanent death is a huge part of Fire Emblem and should never be removed. If you think that, you just ignore casual mode, and you will not be any worse for it. Your experience will not be negatively affected if you just ignore it, and that's what I like. I like to see games that are doing that. Appealing to both hardcore players and new fans without alienating either group, and because of that, I just really love this game. And honestly, I kinda wish that Pokemon would take a page out of its book, because as it stands, Pokemon seems to be heading more towards the newcomer crowd at the moment, and it's kind of alienating the hardcore fanbase a bit. It's not really my place in this video to speak about it, but I do feel that the new Pokemon games are getting a lot easier than they used to be, and while that's not a bad thing, it is a bad thing if you have no choice but to have it be easy for you. I really wish they'd bring back challenge mode. But anyway, with that, really the only game we have to cover next is, well, Awakening. Why Awakening? Well, it's because, here's the thing. There are two other games in the Fire Emblem series I haven't covered yet, and that's because I never played them. The first is Fire Emblem 1, the very first game in the series. And I don't think I ever do intend to play this one. The main thing with this game is I really equate it to Pokemon Generation 1. Was groundbreaking for its time, really has not aged well. The existence of literally two far superior remakes of the original, both Mystery of the Emblem Book 1 and, well, I mean, Shadow Dragon isn't far superior to the original, but it at least makes it more modern and removes a lot of the more annoying mechanics, means that there's almost literally no reason to play this game, at least in my opinion. Really, the only reason to play it now is just for sheer comedy value, just like that's what I think the only reason to play Pokemon Generation 1 is now. Unlike Pokemon Gen 1, Shadow Dragon, I mean, the game that would be remade as Shadow Dragon, isn't exactly glitchy or anything, but it has a lot of mechanics that you can really tell they hadn't fully refined yet. Mainly healers. They don't get experience for healing. They get experience for being attacked by enemies. That's weird. A whole ton of classes like Armor Knights and Hunters can't promote, despite the fact they do have promotions in the game. A lot of characters have almost no personality. There's no support conversations, some characters don't even have death quotes, and a lot of characters aren't even palette swaps. They're worse. They have the exact same portrait as other characters. So, really, to me, I don't see much reason to play this one, unless I want to go back for it for a hilarious thing. Oh yes, not only that, but stat-boosting items. Stat-boosting items are hilariously broken in this game, because they give +5 to the stat that you use it on, permanently. In a game where stats cap at 20, that's a really, really, really big deal. And yeah, stat boosters are so broken there, it's not even funny. The next game I've never played is Gaiden, and unlike the original Fire Emblem 1, I actually really do intend to play this someday, and I feel like I really need to. Whenever I get the time, I have to go ahead and play this one, because I've actually heard very good things about it. It's pretty much the black sheep of the series. Why is it a rule that with Nintendo series, the second game is always the strangest? I mean, you have Zelda 2, which is a totally different genre to the rest of the series, and Super Mario Bros. 2, which in America was a totally different game. And now Fire Emblem 2, which has world map traversal, monster skirmishes, a whole lot of weird things that actually did make their way into later installments, interestingly enough. This game was kind of like the prototype for Sacred Stones, but mostly Awakening. The map system is a lot more reminiscent of Awakening there, and I've heard a lot of good things about it, even though I haven't played it. The story does sound pretty good, especially with some of the plot twists. Yes, a game that old has plot twists, which is kind of amazing. I'm not actually sure I'd be a big fan of the fan translation though, because from what I've read, it includes a bit of swearing, which I really think has no place in a Fire Emblem game. I kinda hate it when fan translations just spice up the original by adding in swearing that wasn't there before, so yeah, I'm not exactly a big fan of that. But, what I am a big fan of, though, is Gaiden's music. I've listened to the soundtrack of Gaiden quite a lot, and I actually think it has some of my favourite 8-bit songs ever, especially the Final Chapter theme. The Final Chapter theme, if ever there was a song that I want a Smash Brothers remix of more than anything, it is the Final Chapter theme from Fire Emblem 2. They have to do this. Every time a new Smash Brothers game comes out, I go to the Fire Emblem stage, I look at the music, and I go, ah, damn it, no Gaiden Final Chapter theme. I want it so much. There has to be a Smash Brothers remix of it eventually, because it is one of my favourite Final Chapter songs in the entire series. Even though it's 8-bit, it's such an epic song. But yeah, that's another game that I haven't exactly played, so I do need to. And with that, we're down to just one game left. And that would be Awakening. Now, I'm not actually going to talk much about it here because I'm currently doing a playthrough of it, and you can pretty much find all my thoughts and opinions on the game in those videos. And I plan to fully talk about how I feel about this game once I get to the end. But for those of you who can't wait that long, I'll just be very brief about my opinion on it. I don't think this is the best game in the series, by far, but it is far from the worst, and I don't think it deserves a lot of the hate the fanbase gives it sometimes. Really, I feel like this game is the Frozen of Fire Emblem, in that people hate it just because it's popular. I get there are a lot of things that aren't that great about Awakening, I understand that, and I understand not liking it, but the thing is, I can't stand the way a lot of fans hate it because it brought more casual players to the series. I think that was a good thing. I mean, the series would have ended if it weren't for that. There are actually fans out there who seem to say that I'd rather the series have ended than we got Awakening. And that, honestly, I feel is a very toxic attitude for a fan base to have. You're not really a fan of something if you want that something to end. That just feels kind of hypocritical to me. Yes, they added in things that made it more appealing to the masses. Yes, the characters are more stereotypical than most games, but they do have depth if you can find it. Some of the support conversations are actually pretty good, surprisingly enough. The story, I admit, is very cliched and definitely takes a major nosedive after the Gangrel arc. But Fire Emblem has always had pretty cliched plots. Fire Emblem's more about have a cliched plot but do it well, and make the characters memorable, rather than trying to make a completely unique plot that just is totally subvert your expectations. I mean, it's no Xenoblade Chronicles or anything like that. People also seem to forget that Awakening was meant to be a celebration of the series. It's kind of like a milestone anniversary celebration. And because of that, the plot was deliberately cobbled together from the greatest hits of every previous Fire Emblem plot. Now, whether that was a good idea or not, I'm not exactly sure. but at the very least I can see why people would criticize the plot. But I still think as a game, Awakening's main flaw is how easy it is to break. The developers must have spent a long time making sure Lunatic Mode was actually beatable, and I commend them for that, but in doing so, they forgot to realize that they made even a hard mode kind of laughably easy if you know what you're doing. Funny thing is, I've never actually finished Awakening before, because on my first playthrough, because I did a combination of paralogs and DLC and grinding for skills and supports, my characters got so strong that I got up to like chapter 21, and the game was totally effortless. Nothing was a challenge, and I just didn't feel like continuing because I saw no incentive to. The game just completely bored me. And that was, to me, the main flaw of the game. It got a bit too easy. More like it was just too easy to break. And that's why I'm glad that the next Fire Emblem game is looking to nerf a lot of the mechanics in Awakening that were pretty broken. That being said though, I still think Awakening is by far one of the best games available for the 3DS. Definitely a must-own for anyone with a 3DS, and it's probably, again, my third or fourth favourite in the series. Again, I put it at, like, upper middle in the series, but not really, really high, but definitely more than the average, and definitely not as low as some fans rank it. I've even heard people calling Fire Emblem Awakening the worst game of all time. Really, I'm not exaggerating. That is just downright stupid when you know about games like Big Rigs and E.T. the Atari game. Oh, and Sonic 06. Don't forget Sonic 06. The voice acting is also one of the best voice acting jobs Nintendo has ever done. And that's why I'm actually really worried about the new game, because I'm not sure how they're going to top it in terms of voice acting. In fact, they pretty much got every single well-known voice actor in the entire industry for Awakening, so I'm not really sure if there'll be anyone left to do voices for the next game. The localization, overall, it's very good, and, like, I'd say 80% of the localization is absolutely fantastic and one of the best localizations I've seen. The remaining 20% is by far the worst localization job I've ever seen. Now, I'm going to make videos dedicated to talking about that later, once I get to the end of Awakening, and you'll hear me talk about it as I get it later. But I will say that while most of Awakening's localization is fantastic, there were one or two situations where they made some very questionable decisions, and I'm really not a big fan of some of the directions they decided to go in. Localizing is a tricky process. If you go too far, you can sometimes make certain areas of the game come off as worse than they were in the original. And in some cases, I'd rather have a bland original, like more faithful translation than an actual localization job that was done badly. Just let me point out though, those moments are in the severe minority, but they really stick out to me because of that. There's actually one other game that I want to talk about here though before we close off, and that is Tearing Saga. This is a game that's technically not a Fire Emblem game, but it was made by the series creator Shozo Kaga when he left Intelligent Systems to form his own company. He made this game for the PlayStation, and it was basically a Fire Emblem game in everything but name, to the point where his company did end up getting sued, I think. And they were found guilty of breaching the unfair competition law, but not copyright infringement, interestingly. This game was basically Shozo Kaga's plans for his next installment of the Fire Emblem series, just, well, changed to remove any reference to Fire Emblem at all. But really, this game is pretty much a Fire Emblem game in all but name, and I have actually played this one pretty recently, just a few years ago, and I actually really love this game. I think that mechanics-wise, it's one of the most balanced Fire Emblem-style games ever. Like, if you compare, like, okay, if this was an official Fire Emblem game, it would probably be one of my favorites in the series. It's actually, like I said, remarkably well balanced. A lot of the characters have interesting things that make them worth using. Even a certain character who leaves the party forever after a certain point still manages to actually be worth using until then. It's really amazing. And they also carried over their ability to make good Ests from Fire Emblem 5, with some really good S-type characters. especially Naren, who's considered really good even by tier listers of that game. They also did the traversable world map thing very well overall, and it was kind of interesting that one team had random encounters that you could repeat, and the other didn't. That sounds like a certain new Fire Emblem game that's coming out. Interesting. But, yeah. But one thing that I really love about Tearing Saga, though, is its story. Its story is surprisingly unique. The best way I can describe it is mentioning if anyone knows the Tales of series. Now that series' main thing is that it takes pretty much the most cliched JRPG plots imaginable, and then about halfway through the game it completely demolishes all the cliches and reveals the entire plot is far more complicated than you thought, and turns out to be something completely different to what it originally looked like. This game is the closest thing to that for Fire Emblem. This game seems to be a cliched Fire Emblem plot at first glance, but the supposedly evil nations actually are not as evil as they seem. And the supposedly good nations have their dark secrets. There's a lot of interesting things to this story, and the supposedly generic villain who wants to bring about the end of the world actually has more depth than you probably think. I was actually very surprised when I played through this one. The story really went in a different direction than I thought, and I really enjoyed that. I actually think it's got a pretty great story overall. And I actually really would love to do a playthrough of Tearing Saga for this channel, but there's a problem. The translation patch. Now, of course, this game was never officially released in English, and there is a translation patch out. However, they pretty much released an unfinished beta version of the translation, and here's how it works. Chapters 1 through 8 are pretty much amazing. Basically, official localization quality. I put it up there with Shadow Dragon's localization and how good it is. Just the dialogue, it all flows naturally, the characters' personalities all come through. I just think those chapters are absolutely fantastic. Now, after that point, the quality drops quite a bit, but it's still tolerable, from around chapter 10 to chapter 20-ish. So yeah, major drop in quality, but it's still at least tolerable. But then, after chapter 20, the last third of the game, the translation quality drops to zero wing levels of so bad it's good. Trust me, I was laughing out loud. I was almost crying with laughter at how hilariously bad some of the translations were. Basically, there's a whole romantic flashback with one of the main characters that's supposed to come off as heartwarming, but ends up coming off as the most hilarious thing that I've ever seen in my life, simply due to lines like, "You are so airheaded, you are getting on my nervous." Nervous as in nervous system. Yeah. Other classic lines from the same scene include, "I will go revive Mr. Priest myself." Yeah, I still love that scene, but for all the wrong reasons. I actually really want to record a video of that someday and actually just show that scene off for you guys, because that is a very, very hilarious scene, unintentionally. You kind of gotta not be too hard on it, though, because apparently by that point in the translation, they only had one translator left on their translation team, and English wasn't even his third language, so yeah, that came off as not really all that great, but you can understand why. So I'm waiting for a better translation patch before I do a playthrough of this game. Trust me, you'll want it, because otherwise the last part of the game, where the plot gets really interesting, it sort of turns into a laugh fest. But that's basically all I wanted to talk about. Well, finally, that went on for a very, very long time, much longer than I expected, but that is my Fire Emblem retrospective for the series' 25th anniversary. I love this series. It is still my favourite game series of all time, well, tied with Pokemon, and I hope it keeps going for many, many years to come. I have very high hopes about Fire Emblem 14. I'm looking forward to definitely playing both the Hoshidor and Nor routes, and who knows, depending on how tempted I am to see information on the internet, depending on how good I am at resisting, you might even see me do a blind LP of those games when they come out. I would really like to do that. and also Shin Megami Tensei Cross Fire Emblem. Now, I might not be doing much with that game now. I'm certainly more interested in that game than I was before, based on the new trailer, but only because I'm more of a fan of Persona than I am of mainstream SMT, and I think this looks a bit more like Persona. I'm kind of the exact opposite of a lot of other people like that, but I don't really care. That game's interesting. I'm probably not a blind runner or anything, but I might play through that game at some point if I have enough interest in it. I'll have to play it myself first to see if I actually like it. But until then, it's been a great 25 years. I really hope that we'll see even more, because I really love this series. Keep making amazing games, Intelligent Systems. And, well, this is Big Clingy signing off.